All right, folks. So this week at the Combine, we saw a number of potential game changers in the NFL. Today, I have on the phone with me right now someone who is already changing the game in the world of sports branding and marketing. I'm talking about Lauren Walsh. She is with us for an exclusive interview. Lauren, how are you today?
What an intro. I'm great. I'm so excited to be talking with you. Thanks for letting me come on and chat.
Lauren, the pleasure is all mine. Throughout the week, you were in Indianapolis. Can you take us through that experience?
Absolutely. So the Combine is an interesting event. It is one of the only NFL events where every single person who works within that league is in one place. And so with it being in Indianapolis, it's a little bit of a kind of smaller, big city, I like to call it. So the way that they do it is that everyone stays at the same hotel. Everyone kind of hangs out in the same area, the same lobby. And so it's actually wild. I mean, if you're someone who's on the outside and you wanted to see every single person you could imagine, and I mean from an agent standpoint to GMs, head coaches, everyone is in the same place. So it's interesting to be around that and see all these different people and just see kind of how people come together. I mean, outside of the game, see who has the relationships. So they don't let outside spectators in to actually watch any of the actual Combine. So whether you're an agent or you're on the brand and marketing side like myself, you have to actually watch it from a TV, just like everyone else back at home. But the one thing, as I mentioned, that you have access to is you're seeing all these people. So, when we went to go out to dinner after we had all of our meetings, we ran into Pete Carroll. We're going through the lobby of the hotel, again, walking to another meeting. We're running into Mike Zimmer. So all of these different people, again, they're just there. And it's kind of crazy from an outside standpoint just to see all those people in one area. But that's how it is. And it's nice because it kind of breaks down those barriers, and again, everyone's just there to do their work. Everyone's there for the same intention, and just to make really, really good connections.
So you talked a little bit about meeting some major figures. I know you mentioned Pete Carroll. What are the rules in terms of how you can approach figures like this from the outside?
I think the best rule is don't do it. I know that sounds a little crazy, but the thing is, whether you're in or out of the industry, at the end of the day, these are normal people, and sometimes that's hard to understand. And so unless you have something that you can add value to that, let's say, for example, I was someone who had something that Pete Carroll needs. Maybe I know someone personally who's a coach who he needs to hire or something. Then maybe you figure out a way to get introduced. But it's definitely an industry where you're not just running up to people and saying, "Hey, here's who I am, and here's my business card," and because it's not going to go anywhere. And so you have to figure out, and you learn pretty quickly that this industry is built on relationships. So I always tell people, I'm like, don't even waste your time, because people, they're going to think that you're like this crazy person who's just running around throwing business cards at people. But somehow everyone's connected. So what we'll do is, if there's someone who, is that influential, someone that we need to get to, we speak to someone who has that direct contact and has a relationship. So it comes across that it's just a little bit more trusted, because people within the industry just, they keep their time and they keep their relationships kind of close to their chest and protect them. But if you can find those right people, they'll make those intros.
So given the fact that you weren't actually allowed to go on the grounds, what was your day-to-day life like during that time in Indy?
It's back-to-back meetings. So what we do is that we pack everything together. So we were there only for about, I think, 27 hours for this trip. Last year it was quick too. In the past I've gone for a few days, but we got in and we literally had 3 back-to-back meetings. And then it's also something where you kind of have to be on standby, because the agents have meetings through the NFL that they have to attend, but sometimes they'll catch a break from it or it'll get out early. And if you're trying to meet with one of those agents, you have to be ready. So we were literally eating lunch the one day and I got a text that said, "Can you meet in 10 minutes?" And it was literally like, "Yep, let me grab the check, let me get over to the hotel, like we'll be there." So that's how it goes. So we we definitely jam-packed our schedule with meetings, but then we left open different windows where there were just a few hours that we could slot in meetings that would come up. Because what happens is someone will hear that you're there. So someone who I know in the industry and I forgot to even say we're going to be in town, I'll be like, hey, are you here? Or, hey, I just got to Indy, can you meet? And you look at your calendar and you're like, yep, I've got 15 minutes or 30 minutes until the next meeting, and you just fit it in. And so it's literally like just back-to-back meetings all day.
So is it almost like you have a list of potential candidates on your radar, and then while you're there, you could get a call at any second informing you that a potential player or anyone associated with the league could reach out to you?
Yes, and for us at the Combine, it's usually their agents who we're meeting with. So it's usually less players. They keep the players they try to keep them pretty much locked away where they're doing their training and they're testing all day, and then there is time for media. But besides that, they try to kind of keep them away and in their hotel. But that will come up for agents.
Okay, so I am a rookie prospect coming from college to the NFL, and Lauren Walsh is in Indianapolis. What do I do in terms of building a relationship with LW Branding and getting things started?
So usually it'll take a direct introduction, so some sort of referral, or the other thing is social media. So we also get connected to a lot of individuals through direct message. And, I know the DM kind of has its own little connotation these days, and it's mentioned in songs and all that, but let me tell you, it goes down in the DM from a business standpoint, because they know that, if they can reach directly out to you, you'll probably see it, especially if they already have a verified account, and vice versa. There are different individuals that, maybe they've said something to us and we're able to respond right back, but that's usually the easiest way. Or again, there's a way to find out, okay, if these people are actually someone, I have to know someone who's connected to them, and, next thing you know, someone's texting or calling you and saying, hey, so-and-so agent gave me your number.
So doing a little bit of research and looking over your website, by the way, for those listening in, it is lwbranding.com. But anyway, I was looking through, and I know that in terms of who you work with, who you deal with, you do have a certain level of standard in terms of who you are looking for. What are the certain things that you analyze and the things that you gather that let you know that, hey, this is a legitimate client that I'd like to work with?
Number one is character. So we decided over the course of the last year, we decided to step back and define very, very clearly what our morals, ethics, and values are as a company. And we decided that we will not stray away from those in any aspect. So number one, when we have the opportunity to look at a potential client, we look at their character. Who are they as a person? Who would their friends say that they are? Who would their family say that they are? How are they represented on social media? How are they representing themselves online? And then, of course, it does come down to, what is their level of play? Because what we have to be cognizant of, and I'm always very honest, the reality is that not every single professional athlete is going to have a brand off the field unless they're willing to work on it. And a lot of times these days, individuals will think that just because you play in the pros that you deserve to make a ton of money outside of your contract with the team. So we'll look at it. We'll actually look and say, is this person marketable? Can we actually make them money and help them build their brand that is going to allow them to leave a legacy? So definitely character number one, and then number two, it has to play into the fact that can they actually build something off of who they are, and are they performing on the field?
So for those that are wondering out there, whether that be high school athletes, college athletes, I know you've appeared in numerous places and in different publications talking about how to properly brand yourself. What kind of advice would you give to those young athletes, professional athletes that are trying to clean up their image, so to speak?
Authenticity is number one. So here's the key to branding. A lot of people get mixed up and think that you should build a brand around what people want to hear. and want to see, and that's not how it goes. What it is that you need to figure out who you are as a person and then bring that to life with your brand. And so if you're one of those people who kind of quote unquote, needs to clean things up, what you have to do again is step back and figure out, who am I today? Who is this person? What do I represent? What am I about? And then you go through and you look at, are there things out there about me, whether I put them out there, someone else has, even the media, do those reflect who I am today? And if the answer is no, then you have to go through and clean it up. And that's where a lot of times we've actually gotten a lot of business and also a lot of attention in the media, because we have figured out a way to help individuals clean up their social media accounts, because the reality is that they're probably not the same person that they were when they were in 8th grade when they got their first Facebook account.
So when you are building your clientele, and I know you've talked about this because I've seen you live talk about those initial steps where you will look through social media and clear things up. How do you go about doing that? And are most athletes comfortable with social media accounts being looked at by people other than their personal friends?
We do it manually. There's no other way. People have come out with different programs that you can buy and you can use, but it will never, ever scratch the surface as much as doing it yourself. So we literally take their username, we take their password, and we go all the way back to the first time that they've ever put out a post, and we just go one by one. And in our experience, the clients that we've worked with have no problem turning their password over for something like that, because it can save them a lot of money, because we've seen what happens, look back to Laramie Tunsil and things that have come up during the draft, and it'll save you a lot of money because obviously if you drop in the draft, that's dollars attached to that. But also long term, from an endorsement standpoint, you don't want to have that be the first thing that people are thinking of in terms of your brand. So we haven't had any pushback. There are some who, they're on top of it, and we don't have to do it. Like, we can go through and then, we'll even tell them, like, okay, these are the ones that are going to get deleted, and maybe we do it together. But I'll tell you, most times they are beyond happy that we're able to do that for them.
So you talked about really your efforts in making this the best experience possible for these athletes. I'm going to change gears slightly. I know several people in my audience are college athletes, even just regular college students. I know you were a cheerleader at Purdue, and I know many people that watch this video are college cheerleaders right now. How did you go from being a Purdue cheerleader to a game changer in the sports branding business?
It sounds a little crazy, doesn't it? No, but you know what it was? Athletic departments, and I'm sure you can speak to this, being a former college athlete, athletic departments, whether you're at a Big Ten university or you are at a small school, they're very tightly knit, because you spend a lot of time with not only your teammates, but also the other teams. Because at Purdue, we had our own athletic academic center. So the individuals that we're interacting with outside of practice and class are athletes. And you also have, class, and they have certain events that only athletes are at, so that they can share their message with us. But it started then. I had friends who were athletes, and I just saw a need. I saw so many athletes who thought that the NFL or the NBA was kind of the end-all, be-all. And they didn't necessarily understand how to leverage the fact that they were given a free education and that a lot more can come out of that. And then after I graduated, I got hired by the Purdue football team, and I worked as a mentor, and I worked with some of their athletes in a one-on-one aspect where we would go through and just make sure, are you going to class? Are you getting the grades? Are you doing okay on the field? Just what's going on in your life. And so also had to check in with teachers, tutors, position coaches, make sure things were okay. And I saw, again, a deeper need that these individuals just didn't necessarily know how to maximize what was presented to them. And fast forward, a bunch of these individuals that I knew from college ended up playing in the NBA and the NFL. And because they had built trusting relationships back in college and right after, they'd still call me for different one-off things. And I found myself getting excited about that. I'd have my day job, and I worked in corporate America 5 years, but when they called or texted me for little things that they needed that they weren't going to their agent about, I was like, wow, I really love this because I feel like I'm really making a difference in their life. And that's where the idea came up, where I eventually was like, you know what? I don't know if it's going to work. I've always had that entrepreneurial spirit. I have to at least try to go for it and turn this into a business and see what happens.
So at the end there, I noticed a little bit of a feeling. It almost sounded like you were, not that you weren't willing to do this, but maybe you had kind of a feeling that maybe it couldn't work out. Knowing now how events have transpired, what would you tell a young woman, a college student who maybe is thinking about this as a career path, particularly women, knowing this is a predominantly male industry? What kind of advice would you give them in terms of taking that step forward and getting that leap of faith?
Great question. I think number one, fear is a liar. I think I've come to figure that out and, learn the hard way that sometimes you start to get this self-talk, and sometimes that voice inside your head, or even the voice coming from some of the people that maybe are closest to you, it's not always the best. And it's easy to get caught up and think like, ooh, maybe this isn't going to work. And I'll be honest, that happened to me a few times where I literally thought to myself like, shoot, I might have to get a job. And looking back and seeing where I am now, I'm glad that I stuck it out, but there were times that I doubted myself. And at the end of the day, you have to be your own biggest cheerleader and also your own biggest coach. So you need to be able to motivate yourself. I remember finding myself in positions where I would search on YouTube for motivational video, and that's where I went wrong, because if you need someone else to motivate you to pursue what you're saying is your own dream, you've already lost the battle. So you have to figure out, what is that why? I was just talking to my team about this before you and I got on the phone, and I was telling them the thing that gets me so excited in the morning when I wake up is that we are doing impactful work. And literally there's so many pinch me moments that make me think, wow, this is actually my career. We get paid to do this and we work with amazing people. I mean, it's nuts. But what it is that I figured out that's my why. My why isn't to get up and make a bunch of money. That's all great, but that comes with it. There has to be something deeper. So figure out what that why is for you and then go all in. You have to understand that a lot of the people who are closest to you, they're not going to get it because they don't understand. And a lot of times what they have to say to you and their advice, it's coming from a good place, I promise you. But you have to just go with your gut. And if you truly believe that you can go after what you're doing, I guarantee you that it will happen. But also, you have to figure out a way to set goals. Because I hear all the time, I listen to people speak and they're like, chase your dreams and do what you want. And I'm like, cool, but how do I actually do that? And so it also comes down to have a plan. You need to be able to have an actual plan that is here's where I'm starting, here's where I'm going, and break it down into attainable things. So have a high level long-term plan and then break it down into monthly, weekly, daily goals, and have things that you're actually going after.
Lauren, really appreciate you coming on. It was a real pleasure for me. What is the future of LW and what is the future plan?
Yeah, great question. I mean, we're taking over. No, but you know what it is? We broke into baseball this past year, which is just amazing. It's been very, very exciting for me. So baseball world this year. And our other thing is that, we are expanding as a team, which has been fun. So we've expanded. We just added another full-time person to the team. And now we're really also trying to figure out, how do we tell more of our story? Because what we want to do is, we want to do more of this, exactly what you're trying to do, and to kind of pick my brain and figure out how I can leverage what I've done to help the next generation. We want to do that even more. And so you'll hopefully see a lot more of that going on with the content that we're putting out and sharing. And then we're also kind of, we're turning in. So we're at the point where it's no longer about growing by adding clients. It's about growing by doing even deeper and better work for the clients that we already have on our roster.
Lauren, again, thank you so much. For those wondering, the website for LW Branding is simply lwbranding.com. Feel free. There's a lot of information on there about the brand, about some of her clients, and about what she is doing and great things she is doing. Lauren, thank you again.
Yeah, thank you so much. Good luck with all of your stuff.
All right, the pleasure was all mine.
Thank you. Talk to you later.
All right. Folks, a great interview there with Lauren Walsh with LW Branding. She talked about her experience at the Combine. Now I'm going to dive in to the field drills that unfortunately she didn't have access to except on the television like you and me. But here I am to talk a little bit about that. Starting with the quarterbacks, what I took away, I was just looking at really everything. I looked at the 40s, but for me personally, the 40 in terms of quarterbacks usually isn't too much of a wow factor for me. Most of the time, I kind of have a general idea of how fast they are ahead of time, but for me, really the focus for these quarterbacks was during the field drills. And I took a special watch at the different route combinations, really just looking at the different prospects here. I looked at the slant routes. I have everything broken down. Finley looked good for the most part. He had a pretty accurate, good ball, but on a particular throw, he didn't lead his wide receiver. Fitzgerald, really, I think at this Combine, he is what we thought he was, a solid runner, a power runner, but really in terms of the accuracy, a little bit of a concern. We saw Will Greer out there, who, in my opinion, didn't particularly raise his stock, but in terms of the guys I was really looking for, in terms of the I'm not sure or maybe not 100%, that Kyler Murray showed up to the Combine but didn't actually throw, came out at 5'11", 5'10", 207 pounds, which for me, the concerns, I'll let the GMs, I'll let the scouts, I'll let those executives look at the tape and come up with their assessment in terms of how well he fits into their schemes. But for me, the overall concern isn't really in his ability, not even the height really. For me, you look at a guy like Blake Bortles in Jacksonville, and believe me, I was a strong defender of Blake, and really to an extent now. I'm probably a lot less hard on him than a lot of others are, but he's been notorious for throwing batted down balls, and he's about 6'4". For me, really what I look for in quarterbacks is I watch the game tape and say, hey, is it a concern that he's throwing a number of batted balls? So for me, the height, just looking at the height itself isn't really what I do. Those who know me, I play college football, and really for me, I saw several quarterbacks that were not particularly tall, but didn't really get the ball batted down either. I also play with a number of tall quarterbacks, whether or not they got the balls batted down. It just a lot of different factors. I like to look at the release point, maybe a little more so the release point. Are they a mobile guy? A lot of times mobile guys like Kyler Murray, they can roll out in the pocket. They can scramble. They can avoid pressure. So sometimes how they do in those tight spaces inside the pocket really is a better indicator than actually just looking at the height. In terms of a tall quarterback that we saw, Ohio State's Dwayne Haskins, what I noticed here, really, and by the way, I watched, I would say, 4 solid game films on him. Well, I'll say 3 solid game films, and against Maryland, I was actually there live, so I actually saw him perform against Maryland live, and out of this combine, I was really looking to see if he would show me something. But really, from what I gathered, I really don't think I learned a lot. In terms of going back in the pocket, being in an Urban Meyer offense, the tendency you see guys in the shotgun, so I was looking for was this drop. For me, it did look a little off in terms of the timing, in terms of the rhythm. I think he might still not be completely used to going under center on a routine basis. And even some guys, I don't know much about his upbringing or the kind of offense he ran in high school, but sometimes even if you do run an offense under center at the lower level, if you're taking, multiple years in the shotgun almost exclusively, you can tend to lose that art just in that quick span. So for me, he looked good throwing the deep ball. I know he completed one deep. There was one that was maybe a touch overthrown. Where I really noticed, maybe I don't want to exaggerate too much and call it a terrible concern, but in terms of those short or intermediate timing routes, is I think maybe something that Haskins can work on. So I have here on the out routes, he was a little late on his out routes. Part of that was the drop. I don't know if his release is particularly fast. So, and part of that has to do with the receivers, getting used to the receivers, which obviously at the combine you can be throwing with. They are wide receiver prospects, but they aren't the guys you're used to throwing to. So, I noticed with Haskins a little late getting out on a couple of them. I have on here that he looked a little slow with the 3-step quick drop, something that Joe Montana was a master with, the quick 3-step drop, throwing the timing patterns, rolling out. Haskins, I would say, not particularly mobile. So, sometimes with quarterbacks that aren't very mobile, sometimes these quick timing routes, because they are done often on the move, that's something I'd like to look for. Can Haskins throw on the move at the next level? Can he get those timing routes down? And, I think he has the arm. I don't think anyone really questions that. He's got a big arm. He can chuck it deep. But what you do notice, though, is that at Ohio State, some of these receivers are actually at this combine. We had great speedsters, guys like Paris Campbell, McLaurin, and you think to yourself, is this a guy that's just tossing it around the yard, very fast receivers, or is this guy the real deal? I tend to believe he's got a good frame, he's got a good body. But I think this is a quarterback that may not thrive right away, or at least not in particular systems. I think in terms of him being in a hypothetical West Coast offense, an offense that really utilizes a lot of quick slant patterns, a lot of in routes, out routes, etc. Those were the concerns that I had just with my naked eye watching the combine on TV. Just those quick out routes. He did look better. He looked better as the day went on the out routes. So what I do ask myself, is it a right side or left side thing, or is it just a matter of getting loose, getting started kind of thing? Because I know they're thrown to the left side before they're thrown to the right side. So I ask myself, is it a directional thing? Because some guys do throw better to certain sides of the field, or is it a thing where the timing was off and he just had to get going? Those are the things that I noticed in large with Haskins, a guy that I think had a big chance to light up the scouts. I'm not sure that he did, at least not to me. Not that I think his draft stock drastically fell, but I just don't think that he in particular jumped out at me in terms of saying, hey, I know for sure this is the guy kind of thing. Even though the college stats give you a solid impression. And I think something to add here, and I think something that maybe hasn't been talked about in NFL circles regarding Haskins is I wonder why there isn't even at least a little mention that actually the only real Urban Meyer quarterback that I would even say has had even a little bit of long-term success in the National Football League, probably Alex Smith. And you think of Alex Smith, you think of Urban. He coached at Florida, Ohio State, but Alex Smith at Utah, although they were very good during that period, they obviously went to a BCS Bowl and whatnot. But of all places, Alex Smith is really the only guy that comes to my mind that has had long-term success in the NFL as a Urban Meyer quarterback prospect. You look at Tim Tebow, he had maybe that brief little season, but even during that season, you can attribute a lot of the Broncos' success to that defense, although he did have that performance against the Steelers in the playoff game, and of course the game winner that he threw to Demaryius Thomas at that time. But you think about guys like Cardale Jones, who really has been a backup in the NFL with the Bills, with the Chargers, hasn't really had any stint as a starter worth noting. You think of a guy like J.T. Barrett, who's been in the league now for a couple years. He has really been a backup. Maybe it's a little too soon for me to jump the gun and say that they're failures in the NFL per se. Maybe just not the right opportunity. I'd have to look into that a little more. But what I do know is this, that in the NFL with Urban Meyer, you really don't see the quarterback position, even with the college success, translating to NFL success. And I think you kind of wonder why that is. Urban being such the tactician that he is, I think in many ways Urban employs it is a power spread. I'll call it a power spread. They run a lot of power in the run game, so what they'll have a guard pulling a lot of times, and that runner will follow that guard, or they'll have a down block and a pull. That's really the art of the power play. And of course the quarterback, typically for him is a runner, and they can use the quarterback to run. They can use a variety of different looks in the running game or the passing game. But you look at Urban, the way he finds ways to get speedy playmakers in the open field. You wonder sometimes, are these quarterbacks for Urban at the college level more of a product of the system, or is Haskins an outlier in this scenario? Obviously, taking into consideration that a couple of those quarterbacks haven't been in the league for a long time, but you do wonder, at least I wonder, is Haskins, do you see maybe because of the bigger body, maybe you see because of that bigger body, you do see the traits in terms of his strong arm, that maybe he could be an exception. I'm not going to say flat out that he isn't an exception, but I think something to consider here are these timing routes, these intermediate pass patterns, the accuracy, is that a product of being in Urban's offense, or maybe Urban, being the coach that he is, maybe hiding the weaknesses of his quarterbacks, or maybe it's just that he's got a heck of very fast receivers, and at the combine, not that these guys are slow by any means, but maybe he just needs to play a little catch up a little bit and get the timing right with those other receivers. You think about some of the teams that are on the board. You think about the New York Giants, who many have speculated could have Haskins. Maybe with Odell Beckham, a speedy guy like that, maybe it doesn't make a difference. But maybe in terms of other teams, if you're throwing a deep ball and maybe he's a touch slower than a Paris Campbell, who freaking absolutely lit up the combine. In terms of that 40, I knew he would, but you look at that and you ask yourself, is it the system? Is it a great crew of wide receivers? Even a pretty solid run game with J.K. Dobbins and Weber? What are the factors that could be at play here? I'd like to see Haskins again at the pro day. Maybe see if the timing looks a little bit better. Is the accuracy? I'm going to look at the accuracy and the intermediate patterns. I'm also going to see if maybe he's worked on that drop, particularly that quick 3-step drop. See if he's adjusted to it. See if he's been training, looking at that. For me, Haskins, I don't think his stock significantly dropped, but at the same time, I came away wondering a little bit, can he get used to the timing of the NFL, and was his success partially a result of the great receivers he had in Urban Meyer? I'd like for you to think in. Alright, so with that being said, we talked a little bit about the receivers in this draft class. Really, in my opinion, you got a bunch of great ones. It's hard for me to say in particular that someone could be the next Julio Jones, the next Antonio Brown. I really don't know. But what I will tell you is this. There are a lot of guys, a very deep group of receivers in this draft. A lot of speed in this draft, I'll say. Starting with guys like Campbell, who I have unofficially at a 4.37. We talked. You've probably heard about Metcalf from Ole Miss. DK Metcalf really running a strong time. Led all the receivers. Also at 6'5", at his size, really impressive. But you also notice that he's got a slower 4.5 shuttle run, which for me it is a very strange occurrence for a guy to run a faster 40 than the shuttle run. So what I do think is that maybe Metcalf, he's a burner type receiver, but you kind of wonder, is he a really good route runner? You kind of wonder, can he make those cuts? Can he make on the dig route? Can he get up the field and then disguise it? Can he make those adjustments on the fly? I don't know. But for me, just based on the short little numbers there, I kind of ask myself, is he purely a burner? Can he make those routes? You saw against Alabama, he had that big 90-plus yard touchdown run. Against LSU, he had over 100 yards receiving. Some wonder about his health history. That neck injury that took him out in the middle of the season. I don't know for sure what the whole gist of the injury is. For me, you can, at a certain point, you can recover from an injury like that and do field drills, but obviously when you put the pads on, sometimes the feeling can be a little different. So I don't know if he's fully recovered or not. I hope and pray he has. And, from the emotion, many of you probably saw the pictures. Obviously, an emotional guy after that happened, and rightfully so. He probably just earned himself a top 10 draft spot, probably top 15 at the latest. Really an interesting event there that transpired. I'll get into that more, but first I'm going to go through some of the other position groups. I'm going to get to the D-line, really my specialty. Those who know me well know that I played defensive line at the college level. Here's what I was looking for. Really saw a bunch of great prospects. Probably the deepest group if you ask me. Some of these guys I think would normally be first rounders, but many of them may slide just because there's only so many to go around. So I have a bunch of notes here on some of those top prospects, and what I came to conclude is that you have about 4 or 5 guys, and their numbers, man, you can just look at them, and you can really just switch the names out, and you have no idea who they are. So I'll take this for an example. So you have a guy like Nick Bosa. He's got a 3-cone, which for those that don't know, the 3-cone drill, I love this drill. I would say I like it more for defensive ends, maybe even more so than inside guys. But really how the drill works is this. You got one cone at a certain spot. Then you'll have another cone straight ahead, 5 yards away. And then you'll have another cone to the right side. So that's why they call it oftentimes the L drill, because it goes like this. So you have the L drill. What you do is you'll start at that first mark, and you're going to run forward, then you're going to turn your body, and then you're going to run back, then you're going to run back again, you're going to go in through, loop around that third cone, come around, and then you're going to run all the way through. I really love it as a test for quickness, change of direction. For me, for the D-line, honestly, I say I look at the 3 cone and the 20-yard shuttle. I think I honestly emphasize that more than I emphasize the 40-yard dash in terms of defensive end translating for defensive ends. Great examples, Nick Bosa. Many consider him the consensus number 1 overall pick. He ran at 6'4", 266 pounds. He ran a 4.7940. Really not a time that is by any means something to write home about. But what I will write home about is a 7.1 3-cone. Now this is a very fast time. And to give you a little perspective, some of the great ones on the 3-cone, Aaron Donald, I know he's more of an inside guy doing stint, but at 285 pounds, he ran a 7.11. Give you another guy. You got a guy like J.J. Watt, who ran an extraordinary 6.88. So while J.J. Watt is a very extraordinary time at that 6.88, that 7.1 is very good. And I'm about to compare it with some of the other guys that were in this draft. Josh Allen from Kentucky, he ran the 3-cone in a 7.15. Josh Allen ran the 20-yard shuttle. It's also known as the pro agility. So if you see either the shuttle run, the 20-yard shuttle, or the pro agility, it's the same drill. And for Josh Allen in the NFL, as at Kentucky, he translates as a 3-4 outside linebacker. He came in with a 4.23 in that pro agility or 20-yard shuttle. Nick Bosa, a very impressive 4.14. You compare that to J.J. Watt, who ran a 4.21. So you think about that 4.14, probably even more elite than that 3-cone time. He did better than J.J. Watt by 0.7 of a second. So very impressive there for Nick Bosa. So in terms of his combine performance, the 40 not elite, but you look at the other numbers. For me, the 3-cone and the 20-yard shuttle, Bosa confirmed his position near the top of the draft board. Another guy I was looking for, Cleveland Ferrell from Clemson. I saw him on tape. Looked very good on tape. An elite defensive end at Clemson. Really didn't disappoint at this combine either. Showed up at the 3-cone, 7.26, a pretty good time. That time, the 20-yard shuttle, a 4.4, which maybe a little slower than Bosa's, slower than Allen's, but for me a 4.4, not a terrible time. You look at a guy, Montez Sweat, who many think showed up the best performance at this combine, a 4.41 on the 40-yard dash, very extraordinary given his measurement at 260 pounds. Also like that he's a 6'6 defensive end, very good length. That length really can come to play when dealing with those tackles. Definitely the goal for an offensive tackle is to get your hands on him first. For the defensive end, if you've got those long arms, you can stick those arms in faster. Definitely an edge for Montez Sweat in this class, longer than Ferrell, Allen, and Bosa in terms of height. Montez Sweat, a 4.29 in that 20-yard shuttle, so not quite as good as Bosa's. So that's where you see the quickness. The 3-cone, a 7.0 flat. Very impressive for Montez Sweat. that 20-yard shuttle. It's gonna check on your agility, moving side to side. You're gonna get in the middle in the stance. You're gonna run 5, 10, 5 for 20 yards. That's what it does, and really a great measure for those guys at the line of scrimmage. Can you move side to side? Can you make those quick moves? Can you spill? It doesn't have the physicalness that can come with spilling, but really a great measurement for just standard quickness. In addition to that 3-cone drill that not only measures your straight line speed going upfield. I like that 3-cone because it does the upfield movement as well as the quickness and agility, the crazy 8 moving around. Another guy I think that showed out. Many really, when he was recruited out of Michigan, he was the number 1 recruit. Rashawn Gary, I'm talking about. This is a guy listed at 6'4", 277, maybe a little lighter than his regular playing weight, and he looked faster to me as well. I saw a lot of tape when I was previewing him in multiple games, looking at last year's tape as well as this year's tape. Ran the 40 at a 4.58. I know I said earlier that the 40 and the quickness, sometimes it can be a little misleading. Sometimes a straight out 40 guy isn't necessarily a great defensive end. But what he did do is this: he backed it up in every other department. A 38-inch vert, which if you're wondering, that was very good at that size. A 3-cone at 7.26, again in the low 7s. I really like a guy that can run that 3-cone in the low 7s like that. And a 20-yard shuttle, 4.29, impressive for a man of that size. Better than Furl. In the same exact ballpark as Montez Sweat, despite weighing 17 pounds more. Oh, man. And in this group, for the defensive line group, sorry I'm taking a little too long to get to this point, burying the lead a little bit. But for me, the guy that I saw that maybe shined, that maybe I didn't know a lot about, I know he was at the Senior Bowl, but his name is John Kaminsky, Charleston. Looking at the numbers, he's 6'5", 286 pounds. I think he projects as either a 3-4 defensive end, as in a type of guy that will be hand in the dirt on the line. Not an outside linebacker. He's not an edge player. A true defensive end in a 3-4 scheme, end or tackle type, whatever you want to call him. Or maybe in a 4-man front, maybe he could get moved to a 3 technique. But he also showed he has the speed maybe to even play as a 4-3 defensive end as well. He actually ran better than Nick Bosa, 4.69 on the 40. In that 20-yard shuttle, though, maybe not quite as quick, 4.38. Still not a bad time in that 20-yard shuttle. But the 3-cone, a very impressive 7.03, which was actually better than Bosa on that 3-cone. You look at the numbers this year, only 2.5 sacks playing at a Division II level. You kind of ask yourself this: does he have the body? I think he does. Can he play at this level though? That is the major question. I watched a little tape on him afterward. Definitely D2 guys, you can't find as much tape as you like. Never enough tape for these D2 guys. Unfortunately, me playing a little bit at the D2 level. But for me, Kaminsky, what I noticed maybe is this: he's got the athleticism. Maybe gets a little high coming out of his stance. What happens is, when you raise up a little bit, that can cause you to get pushed back a little easier. I saw a couple times on the tape where, in fact, he was getting a little high. Maybe that could be his downfall. Sometimes he'd get high and he'd still be able to just use his brute strength and move guys over, but in the National Football League that doesn't work. I don't care how strong you are. If you get too high coming out of your stance, you will not move forward. You will not push backward. In fact, you will be pushed backward. That is my assessment of John Kaminsky at this point. Looking at the tape, something you can correct working out though. Just staying low, getting in a good stance, firing out low. Low man wins is the old adage. Getting a little high. I liked him at this combine though, and I think he raised a few eyebrows. Is it the coaching? Can he develop? That is the main question for him heading into the NFL level. For me, Kaminsky was the guy though, wearing shorts that you probably didn't know about, that shined tremendously at this NFL Combine. My next little section here, the DB group, something I was looking for. A few different guys that I think really all have first round potential. May depend on what the draft board looks like, who trades where in terms of where they're going. I don't know if any of these guys are top 5. Maybe someone can slide up as the draft process goes on. But what I saw is this. You look at the numbers, and really what I do is I looked at both the numbers and the field drills. And what I saw was this. A guy like Greedy Williams, who in many circles is the top defensive back in this draft. He's a corner, ran a 40 and a 4 in the low 4.3, and on tape you can see that speed. Didn't get burned deep, didn't allow touchdowns. But when I was looking at the field drills, you saw some of the movements. He was getting into that back pedal. And on a couple of the drills where they were required to run back or turn out of that stance, he was coming back pedaling, turning his body. Looked like he was moving around the field a little bit. They had the cones set up to where if you were tight, you were within the hash mark. I saw a few times he was running kind of all over the place on the hash. Something to look at. Really what that tells me is this. He's the type of guy, he's so fast, he probably won't get burned. In terms of a guy that's running a straight go route on him. A guy like DK Metcalf, the wide receiver, is the type of guy that does the opposite from the receiver position. He's the type of guy that will run by you and make plays that way. Greedy Williams is the type of corner that can come. That is really his skill set is catered to playing against that type of guy. And what I saw from Greedy is this. Is he a type of guy that can keep that technique to where he doesn't get burned side to side? Will teams like to use a lot of slant routes, a lot of crossing routes, get him to move side to side? I think that's the ultimate test. Also with the bulk not being particularly big, is he a type of guy that guys in the NFL can big body? You look at a guy like Metcalf, a big man at over 225 pounds, running deep. You wonder if he can use his big body like that. A guy in the NFL, in particular right now, you think of a guy like Alshon Jeffrey, maybe, a big body of that nature. In the past, maybe you think of a guy like Plexico Burress. So just, thinking things through, I still think Greedy, a solid first-round grade, probably will still get drafted in the top 15 just because of his overall speed. The athleticism is there, just maybe a couple weaknesses in that technique. A guy in that DB group that I thought shined for me, the All-American out of Notre Dame, Julian Love. I loved what he looked like on the field drills, looked fluid, turning side to side, did a good back pedal, tight along the lines, great fluid motion turning from the back pedal over to the corner of the field. That particular drill where they're moving back and then turning and then catching a ball deep on the other side of the field. Love, I really thought, had good technique in that drill. Ran a 4.54 40. What that tells me is this: he's not so much a guy that backs up and uses his speed. He's the type of guy that can press you probably, get after it in that type of way. Physical corner. Really, I like those guys, but sometimes they don't. When they're running that 40, they don't look quite as glamorous to the naked eye. Some of the viewers out there, but for me, that 4.54 isn't a concern. It's not elite speed, but obviously, I think you can still be good regardless of being just a touch slower. DeAndre Baker in that same range in terms of speed, but you look for is this: DeAndre Baker, 0 touchdowns allowed this season, an elite cornerback from the perspective of not letting guys get by you. The old bump and run, as they say, getting guys bumping. You can't bump nowadays like you could in the days of Dick Night Train Lane in the 1950s and 60s due to that Mel Blount rule. But what I'll say is this, is that if you can get a guy, a physical corner, you can never have too many of those good stellar press corners. even if they are just a touch slower than a guy like Greedy Williams, there is certainly a place in the National Football League for a guy like Julian Love. A guy that really shined for me in this group, someone that I think maybe hasn't gotten as much praise as maybe he deserves, a guy by the name of David Long, Michigan. He ran a 4.45, so almost a tenth of a second faster than Love. Had a bench at 15. Really him, Love, and Murphy all had either 14 or 15 reps on the bench. That's actually a pretty solid number for a corner, if you ask me. The 20-yard shuttle, Murphy of Washington did not run it, but David Long, a very impressive 3.97 on that 20-yard shuttle for him. In the 3-cone, 6.45, an elite time, if you ask me, even for a corner, 6.45. You compare that to a Love 6.72, not so great, but I think he looked better in the field drills than he did on that time. The first team All-American. Now really this last position group that I think something I had my eye on. Obviously I had my eye on the other stuff too, but for me something I was looking at on that first day, going all the way back to that first day, the offensive line, who's legit, who looked good in the times, but maybe even more so, who came in with good technique. Sometimes with offensive linemen, they love to get in the weight room, but what you want to see is this: are they still working on the technique? Are they working on getting out of their stance, getting into that drop back, getting that pass pro technique down? And even in the run game, I know that they're only hitting bags, and I hate to really just judge an offensive lineman purely on hitting bags, but what I look for is this: were they coming off out of their stance at a good pace? Were they getting good hand position? Were they getting that low body position? I was talking about that a little bit with the defensive linemen as well. The same principle, except these offensive linemen are a little bigger, at least in most cases. Maybe the exception being a interior defensive lineman, particularly nose tackle. But some of these offensive linemen, I was looking for the technique. Can they move? And really, Garrett Bradbury at NC State was the type of guy that really raised some eyebrows in this combine. Center, I previewed him a little bit, looking at the NC State Clemson film. I know many of you read that content on brosports.wordpress.com. Bradbury, really the main cog in that offensive line. He's a center. Many comparing him to Jason Kelsey, the center for the Eagles, who I think is the best in the business in the NFL today. For me, Bradbury, you look at the quickness. I saw him in that kickball drill. Looked really good at that. You saw him at the bench, 34 reps. Big time performance, 34 reps. Looked at the various field drills. Saw who was high, who wasn't. Looked at a guy like Andre Dillard out of Washington, left tackle. Really impressed a lot of people at the Senior Bowl. Came at this combine, and I think he really confirmed all the thoughts about him. Looked like a guy like Cody Ford. I thought maybe at times I saw Cody Ford maybe raise up a little bit. But what I really liked from Cody Ford, though, was his pull technique. He played at guard for Oklahoma for a very extensive amount of time, even though he played this past season at right tackle. For me, looking at that, I think the Jaguars, I know many of you listening are Jaguars fans, being from my hometown, I think Cody Ford is a guy that maybe the Jaguars should at least take a look at. Being at that spot where they are, I think the biggest needs for the Jaguars, wide receiver, and that offensive line. And then maybe a third need could potentially be finding a guy to replace Dante Fowler at that outside linebacker spot. But really for me, the top priorities on this football team are finding offensive linemen, mainly a right tackle. You know that Cam Robinson is coming back at that left tackle spot, but if you can shore up a right tackle for the future, Parnell won't last forever. He's also had some injury concerns. So for me, Cody Ford, a guy that you look at to potentially play that right tackle spot, definitely a guy on my radar. I want to see him at the pro day and maybe even look at more tape on him as this draft process goes. You can never watch enough tape, and Lord knows I watch a lot of it. The next consideration for Jacksonville, looking at this wide receiver group, you saw a guy like Metcalf, a big body, deep burner down the field. I think with Foles coming in, I think that they maybe could draft a quarterback, but I think maybe with Foles, I think it eliminates the demand for a quarterback, so to speak, in that first round. I think you could draft one, but I don't know if it's a necessity with Foles being around for, I think, a little bit of time. So I think you have a chance for a guy like Metcalf there at that spot. Like I said earlier, a guy with speed, big body, really something the Jaguars don't have. They really haven't had a big body receiver that can really stretch the field since Allen Robinson. I think they tried to give it a stab with Dante Moncrief, but I don't think the production was what they were anticipating. It was more along the lines of kind of what I was expecting. You look at a guy like Marquise Lee coming off that ACL. He's got some speed, but I think that for him, ideally it'd be nice to have a big body running mate just to diversify the offense a little bit. Plenty of speed in this draft. I also think the Jaguars maybe take a look, maybe even later on, in terms of these tight ends. A lot of good tight ends in this draft. Talking about the two Iowa boys, Irv from Alabama, and just a number of good tight end prospects in this draft. A guy that maybe people weren't talking about much that I liked in the field drills, a guy named Tommy Sweeney, Boston College product. Looked good to me on the field. Number of good tight ends looked good to me on the field, honestly. So for me, that tight end group, something that maybe has been dogging the Jaguars for a little bit of time. I think maybe a tight end probably won't get taken in that first round, but definitely wouldn't be complaining if they took one coming through in that later stage of the draft. All right, folks. So we talked a lot about the NFL draft, a lot of the prospects. For this last segment, I'm going to talk a little bit about the future of where they came from, talking about the college bowl system changes that have been put in place leading up with this report coming out with it. Stadium's Brett McMurphy, the same guy who released the report on the Urban Meyer situation. And here's really what the news is. It'll be made official in May. And here's the gist of it. Alright, so the Las Vegas Bowl will have a Pac-12 opponent every year playing against either an SEC or a Big Ten opponent. And the deal is this. In 6 years, over a 6-year period, I'm talking 2020. This will all start in 2020. 2020, 21, 22, 23, 24, and 25. Over that span, you'll have 3 teams from the SEC, 3 teams from the Big Ten. Now, what I find interesting is that they're having this deal where whoever is not chosen from the list of either the Big Ten or SEC, the other team, so to speak, or the team at the same level, I guess, from that other conference will be playing in the Belk Bowl. More on that later. But the gist is that instead of just one conference being associated with the bowl, there's now options between the SEC or the Big Ten. So in terms of the Belk Bowl, you'll still have an ACC team in there, but rotating between that SEC or Big Ten opponent. What maybe confuses me a little bit, the Las Vegas Bowl, for a long time, actually had to tie in with the Mountain West Conference, which made a lot more sense from a geographical standpoint. So in this Belk Bowl played in Charlotte, it's a little peculiar why in SEC country, ACC country, why you don't just keep it ACC and SEC. What I'm potentially speculating is that maybe this move will keep options open. In particular years, they can choose, the bowl selection committee can choose which matchup is maybe more appealing. So maybe in terms of gaining the attraction for these bowl games, maybe they'll be more appealing for those that, in particular years, maybe the Big Ten team is more interesting than the SEC team or vice versa. Now you're seeing the rise in NFL prospects foregoing these level of bowl games. Even though you actually saw it in a couple instances with the big time bowls, you really see these types of bowls getting threatened by those types of prospects just deciding not to play in these games. So maybe if they can have a little foreknowledge as to who's going to play and who's not, maybe they can sort of monitor or maybe sort of figure out which matchups are more attractive, maybe based on the personnel of the teams rather than some geographic ties that may contribute to the economic nature of the bowl system. With that being said, I think this says a lot about where bowl games are going in college football. Is the bowl system crumbling as we speak? Or, is it just one of those things where we can attempt to make the bowl games the best we can? But one of the drawbacks potentially to this new idea of potential different conferences is that it takes away from the familiarity that the fans build with these particular bowl sites. To give you a good idea of that concept, you have the Rose Bowl game. It has traditionally been a Big Ten and Pac-12 matchup. The odd factor of it being different teams is that different people will be traveling, but really a lot of these people like to book their trips ahead of time, organize, and when you have a familiar set of options, I think that does benefit the bowl games, or at least it seems to be historically. I knew as an SEC fan growing up, in many cases, me being from Jacksonville, Florida, a lot of times my team was either going to the Citrus Bowl or the Outback Bowl. You could easily plan ahead a certain time of year. And speaking of the Outback Bowl is actually a part of this deal as well. In a sense, it will remain a Big Ten SEC matchup for the most part, but they have this deal where it'll feature an ACC team in the event that a Big Ten team plays in the Orange Bowl. So if that is the case, then I think that the initiative here, the large issue here, is that they're trying to maximize the level of talent that these bowl games produce, given the fact that if an ACC team, or if a Big Ten team, so to speak, plays in the Orange Bowl, they don't want this big significant drop off in the quality, I guess, in the bowl game. They would rather hypothetically have, let's say, maybe the third best team from the Big Ten rather than the fourth best team from the ACC, or however you want to draw it up, or the third best ACC team instead of the fourth Big Ten. I think that's basically what we're talking about here. When you consider that the Big Ten, it'll start with the Rose Bowl, and then depending on what else happens with the New Year's Six bowl lineup, you would normally have that next team in the Citrus Bowl, and after that, they'd usually be in that Outback Bowl. Usually the fourth team for the Big Ten. Usually in that range. Obviously, they have some flexibility in terms of who they can pick, but usually that general idea. And with that being said, another interesting development with the ACC. The ACC will now be associated with the Holiday Bowl. This has long been a Pac-12 Big Ten matchup. So we'll see how that works. It was usually a primetime game and nightly. So we'll see how that works as well. The Gator Bowl in Jacksonville, many of you are interested. Something to think about, they have now made this an official ACC and SEC matchup beginning in 2020, that date that I mentioned earlier. This is actually the opposite of what could potentially happen with the Belt Bowl. This one, you actually have a guarantee of two teams in the South lining up in Jacksonville. Jacksonville, obviously, SEC and ACC country. I think this was a big win for the Gator Bowl, and I think the idea of teams from those conferences being in Jacksonville, although they won't have to travel too far, maybe you don't have quite the same vacation trip that maybe someone from the Big Ten would have coming down here. But what I do like is that for the fans, for the commercialism, I think it will draw in more people if the teams are around, and a lot more teams in that a lot more fans in that Jacksonville area, are invested in programs from the South. I think a big win for the Gator Bowl. For the Music City Bowl, another one of those bowl games that has been around for a while, an SEC Big Ten matchup each season starting in 2020. In terms of adding bowl games, now a lot of people are complaining about the existence of bowl games, but with the new Los Angeles Stadium coming in at Hollywood Park, there will now be a bowl game at that venue, and it pretty much looks like the old Las Vegas Bowl. You're going to have a Pac-12 opponent versus a Mountain West, just at this grand venue. By the way, this venue, what maybe took me by surprise a little bit, though, is that this venue will be, they will be hosting a national championship game in 2023. But what surprised me, though, is the fact that the Las Vegas Bowl, which will now be played at the Raiders Stadium coming up, I'm surprised that Los Angeles got kind of the lower end of the stick on this. For me, when the deal was broke to have this new Los Angeles Stadium, I really thought that the intention was for Los Angeles to pick up steam and get a higher end bowl. I always knew that the Rose Bowl in that same area would obviously take precedent, and I knew it definitely wouldn't get replaced. But I figured that Los Angeles would maybe get a little something better with this new venue. They are getting the national championship game, so obviously they aren't complaining about that. But I just thought that maybe I'm just a little surprised that looks like Vegas got the better end of the stick. From a venue standpoint, I was probably anticipating something the other way around, if you ask me, thinking that they would give Los Angeles actually the better end of the deal, and especially if you consider a college football game in Vegas. Obviously, it's been in Vegas, but it will no longer be at the UNLV site, so it's not a campus game. It'll be at the Raiders Stadium, so I think the whole Vegas thing comes into play now, even more so than, let's say if you had it at that UNLV college site. I think you throw in all the college kids in Vegas scenario in here. I don't know exactly what made them choose Vegas over Los Angeles in that situation. In addition to that, ESPN also creating its own bowl game, the Myrtle Beach Bowl. This game, an interesting matchup here in that you have teams either from the Conference USA, the MAC, or the Sun Belt. All of them can rotate and play 4 times within this 2020-25 period. With that being said, maybe a win for these smaller conferences, although there isn't a guarantee that these teams will be in the bowl. I think this new bowl, I guess, could add an extra team into the pool of bowl participants. Better for the conferences in general, the economy. A lot of the fans, I guess, nationally are wanting some of these extra bowl games to be dropped. ESPN says no, we want to add another one. And for me, more college football, we're better off. All right. And with that being said, more college football, we're better off. I am off this show. I appreciate you joining in. Again, special thank you to Lauren Walsh for joining in. Thank you very much. I hope you all enjoyed.